Thanks everybody for being here and letting me share some ideas with you. If anybody's interested in the details of it, you can track them down at this website. Here's all the papers, the software, the data sets, everything. Here is where I put some more speculative kinds of things, where I talk about what I think the papers mean and so on. So you're welcome to check them out. What I'm going to talk to you about today is kind of a weird topic. I'm going to talk about a little bit about AI and the right way to understand AI through the lens of collective intelligence. In other words, we're going to take a kind of a deep dive into where minds come from, so that we can actually talk about this notion of whether artificial minds have the same status as biologically evolved ones, and so on. And so we're going to look at those kind of questions. So the main points of today, what I'd like to do is this. We're going to look under the hood of biology a little bit to kind of clear out some viewpoints and some terminology that's persisted with us for centuries, basically, but I think are going to have to change. And this idea of discrete natural kinds in biology, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about diverse intelligence, in particular collective intelligence, so very kind of unconventional minds and unconventional cognitive systems. And I'm going to argue that all the things that people argue about today in terms of artificial intelligence are basically a kind of an off-ramp to a much deeper, more difficult discussion about the really deep philosophical questions about what we are, about freedom of embodiment and things like that. It's actually much more, it's a much more complicated set of questions than just to focus on kind of today's AIs. And so we'll talk a little bit at the end about the ethics and the future of humanity and things like that. So let's start with this. This is a well-known painting. It's called "Adam Names the Animals in the Garden of Eden," and so here he is. So this is the old Judeo-Christian story where animals are showing up and Adam gets to name them. Now, something important about that story is that actually it was on Adam to name the animals. God couldn't do it. The angels couldn't do it. Adam was the one that had to name them. I think that's a very interesting part of that story, and I think for us it has two lessons. One that we're going to have to break, I think, as the future moves on, and the other one that's actually very deep and that we're going to have to dive into. The part that has to be given up is this notion that all of these species are discrete. They're natural kinds. Everybody knows what each of these are. They're separate from the others. In fact, Adam is also a discrete entity and completely different from all of the others. And this idea that you can sort of number and categorize very specific types of beings, and that's what there is. You can sort of count them, count the animals in your environment. As you'll see in a minute, I think that idea has to go. But what's deep is this notion that Adam, because he is the one that has to live with them, he is the one that has to give them names. Now, in these old traditions, giving something a name was very deep and spiritual. It meant that you've discovered their true nature. You know, knowing the name of something means you know their true nature. And as I'm going to show you at the end of this talk, because of synthetic biology and bioengineering and some other disciplines, we are going to have to name or discover the true nature of all kinds of unusual creatures that you guys will all be living with in your lifetime. So let's start there. Here's the part that has to break. So here's a normal modern human. Lots of philosophy talks about the human mind, does this and that, and humans have responsibilities and rights and all the interesting things. But we know that now, because of evolution and also because of developmental biology, that this is not a sharp category. In other words, if you just track backwards in time, these modern humans are at a particular point in the evolution of a lineage that goes all the way back to single-cell organisms. So if you have something to say about humans, you might ask yourself, well, what about the humans of a couple of 100,000 years ago? What about the hominids of a couple million years ago? What about them? And just understand that all these changes are slow and gradual. And the same thing about development. Whatever you think is true of humans with their true hopes and dreams and cognitive responsibilities and so on, at one point they were a single cell. And this process is, again, very slow and gradual. And so we know now that there's this continuum, right? It's not just a discrete human, but actually a whole continuum of forms that you might have to decide what is the status of these other forms. Not only that, but there's this other continuum going horizontal here in my diagram, where we know that humans are going to be modified and improved. So for various health applications, but also for augmentation technologies, there's no particular reason why anybody's going to want to be stuck in the body that random vagaries of evolution left them with. So, I don't think anybody really thinks that a mature modern humanity, 100 years from now is going to be susceptible to the same dumb diseases, lower back pain, astigmatism, viruses. Presumably all of that is going to get fixed. There's nothing magic about where evolution happened to have dropped us. And so there are technological modifications, there are biological modifications that will be made. And that's because at every level of organization in our bodies, from subcellular materials all the way up, you can introduce different kinds of novel engineered components. And so all of this is now possible. And again, if you have thoughts about what a human is versus what a machine is, you have to ask yourself, how are you going to distinguish this when you are confronted with all sorts of beings along this continuum? You're going to need to find ways to relate to them. And so one of the things that I've been working on for some years now is a framework to be able to recognize, to create, and to ethically relate to truly diverse intelligences that we can have relationships with regardless of their composition, meaning what they're made of, or their origin story. Were they evolved? Did they come out of a factory, or some combination of those? And that means that we need to think about all of these things. So familiar kinds of creatures like primates and birds and maybe an octopus and so on. But also all kinds of weird organisms like colonial organisms, swarms, synthetic engineered new life forms, artificial intelligences, whether robotic, meaning embodied, or pure software AI, and maybe even someday aliens, right? There's probably some sort of exobiological life form out there somewhere that at some point we'll confront. Now, we need to be able to think about all of these in the same way, regardless of where they came from or what they're made of. Now, I'm not the first person to try for this, so here's Rosenbluth, Wiener, and Bigelow in 1943, trying for this scale all the way from passive matter, so rocks and sand and things like that, all the way up to different kinds of active matter, and then various kinds of computational matter and agential materials, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, all the way up to some sort of human metacognition, complex human kinds of minds and beyond. And the goal of this kind of framework is it's not philosophy. The goal is to, first of all, move experimental work forward. So part of my framework is a very strong insistence that when you look at something and you say that's not real cognition, or that is real, this thing really does have intelligence. The goal of this is not just to have philosophical feelings about it, it's to have a toolkit for interacting with these systems that is beneficial, that gives us brings new discoveries, new capabilities, biomedicine, engineering, and so on, and also puts ethics on a better footing, because these old categories that we've had for a really long time for how we deal with other beings are really not going to be of use anymore, and the details are all here if you want to follow that. So a basic fact from developmental biology is that we all make this amazing journey from what people call just physics. I really don't like that phrase, but people use it. So just physics to a complex mind. So each of us started life here as a single cell, a little blob of chemicals, and slowly and gradually it became something like this, or even something like this. So, a complex metacognitive being who's going to say things about not being a machine and so on. This process is gradual. You need to understand developmental biology gives us no magic bright line at which point, boom, you were just chemistry and physics, but bang, that this is where the mind appears. There isn't anything like that. It's a very slow and gradual process. And so what that means is that scientists and philosophers need to develop a story of scaling. We need to understand how the properties of this thing, which follows the laws of chemistry and physics, ends up being something that's also describable by the laws of psychology and psychoanalysis and things like that. The reason that this is possible is because we are all made of an agential material. Unlike Legos and wood and metal and things like that basically just stay where you put them, we are made of a material with agendas. And so this is the kind of thing we're made of. This is a single cell Okay, this happens to be a free-living organism called a lacromeria. You can see that it's extremely competent in its local unicellular goals. So there's no brain, there's no nervous system, there are no stem cells, but this thing is doing everything it needs to maintain its physiological, its metabolic, and behavioral goals. So the first kind of shocking thing to some people that you need to realize is that we are all made of this interesting kind of stuff that has its own agendas. I don't have time to tell you about it today, but the reality is these things, our cells can learn. They can actually have pretty complex problem-solving capacities in different kinds of environments. And so we are a very interesting construction of a very unusual type of material with which we are just now starting to learn how to engineer. But at least, you might think, at least we are a true unified intelligence, right? So maybe you can call an ant colony some kind of collective intelligence, but we have a brain where we feel like a single unified being, so at least we are a true unified intelligence. And in fact, Rene Descartes really liked the pineal gland because there's only one of them in the brain, and he thought that that's where the human experience was centralized, because there's no multiple aspects of it. There's just one in the brain. But if he had access to a microscope, he would have discovered that inside this pineal gland is all this stuff. It's a bunch of cells, and inside of each of those cells is all this stuff. Okay. There isn't one of anything in the brain, and all of us are collective intelligences. We are all made of parts that do things, and the real trick here again is that scaling story, is to tell a convincing, to give a convincing account of how it is that all these parts give rise to something that is a centralized, that has the feeling of being a centralized, unified self. And so this is what my group works on. Now, it's interesting that Alan Turing, who is basically the father of modern computer science, he was very interested in machine intelligence and in computation and programmability and things like this. But so everybody knows that part. But one weird thing is that he also published this paper called The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis, which was basically an attempt to understand how the chemicals of an embryo organize into order from their initial disorder. Now, you might wonder, why would a guy who's interested in computation and intelligence and machine minds and things like that, why would he be studying the chemicals in an embryo? And I think that, although he didn't write about it, I think that Turing saw a very profound truth, which is that the process by which bodies come to be in this physical universe, right, by which your body was self-organized from a bunch of chemicals in the oocyte, is very closely related in a profound way to the question of where minds come from, right? So the origin of the self-assembly of your mind and of your body are very related stories, even though they're treated by completely different communities. So neuroscience and the behavioral sciences versus developmental biology, molecular biology, cell biology. Typically, those folks do not think they're studying the same thing, and I think they're studying exactly the same thing, just in different components.